I want to do something with you. Try this in person. I've usually done it. Oh, do I have to stay there?
I can zoom out.
Okay. I have two balls. One's a golf ball and one's a ping pong. So I want the tallest person in the room to join me up here.
Elaine.
Yay.
Thank you. All right, I'll just hold on to them.
Okay.
And I'm going to have Lane hold his arms as high as he can and drop them at the same time. Now, before he does that, you may want to put your arms
Oh, okay. I have deodorant on today. So.
If you know the answer, don't say it first. But what do you think will happen? Which ball will hit the ground first?
Ping pong, golf ball.
Now,
Depends how good you are.
they're noticeably very different in weight. Almost same size, but very different in weight. Which ball will hit the ground first? Just a prediction.
So
Just
one
a
might
smidgen.
argue that the golf ball would hit the ground first,
Why?
even though I know the answer.
Why?
Because it's denser and heavier
Okay. And why would that make a difference?
because of gravitational pull.
Okay.
And maybe the ping pong is lighter and air resistance will hit it and slow it down in its descent.
So two factors could be operating to make the heavier ball hit first. Anyone else want to argue for the lighter ball hitting first?
Well, it really depends on how good Lane is at dropping them simultaneously
I threw
from
it.
the same distance.
Okay.
And can we actually measure any distance or difference when they hit the ground?
All right, so we're gonna have him back up so you can, if you wanna stand up, you can, and we're gonna have him try his mightiest.
Okay, or you could say the golf ball has more surface area because of the divots, and maybe that would make it.
Right.
The little mini divots? Yeah,
Well, the
okay.
divots are meant to make it flow through the air smoother and further.
Well, yet another reason why it might be faster.
That's
But
right.
I already know the
Okay,
answer.
so it might be faster. All right, so we're gonna count to three, and on three, just to give him as much of an equal starting point as we can.
Okay.
And watch very carefully. We don't care about the bounce, we care about the hit. 1, 2, 3. What happened?
They were at the same time.
At the same time.
Pretty darn close.
What will happen if we insert a tennis ball with the ping pong? It's a little lighter than a golf.
It's gonna bounce a lot higher.
It will go bounce a little
Tennis
higher.
ball with the ping pong. I'm gonna give you a count again. 1, 2, 3. What did you see?
What do we see?
Okay.
Same time.
Same time.
Time. All right.
Bounce higher.
So, what happens if we change the size? Ouch, the size. Let's see what happens if we change the size, because maybe size will matter. 1, 2,
2.
3. The same,
Pretty much.
right. All right, so do we have anyone who actually knows the answer? You know, someone else, someone know the answer?
Sarah's our physics expert.
Sarah,
The
clearly.
gravitational pull is at the same rate.
Is the same rate on any object?
Well, it's if you don't have wind resistance or other things. So if you were to drop a feather, it might drop slower because the air is pushing, there's more surface area pushing on it. But in terms of gravity, pull is the constant rate.
Newton's Newton's apple experiment. When the apple fell on his head. Notice that.
Unless you're a post-structural scholar and then there's no reality.
There's no reality, okay. And in the Newton example, he only had one apple. So what are you saying, Lane?
Well, he had that he noticed that an apple would fall from it. He just noticed how the apple fell, but then he also did further experiments as well, looking at different weights, things at different weight, to see if they would fall at a different rate. And they fall at the same rate. And the really cool thing that I remember watching is that they got NASA's like vacuum chamber, and they totally made a complete vacuum, and then they dropped a bowling ball and a feather, and they fell at the same rate. And like if you
Amazing.
watch the super slow-mo, the feather doesn't move as it falls. There's no like ruffling, it just goes
Right.
poof, straight down. It's really
Very cool.
really cool to see. Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna see if you can figure something else out. Now, this bounces, right? And Not as much bounce. And we're gonna do the tennis ball. All right, now if I put these three together, what's gonna happen to the bounce? Any change?
The,
It will increase the bounce of the tennis ball and the golf
Do you
ball.
want me to,
you had to like, it's like, it'll be like a
Anything-
trampoline.
all right,
Like you kind of bounce off each other. Whoa!
right. So, why in the world would we need to know, and this is, I'm gonna fall on this. Okay, why in the world would we need to know the speed, the rate, the differences, the predictions? Why would that be relevant? I mean, we don't walk around with 3 balls during the day and test this, so how could this be useful?
We're all budding rocket scientists.
That too.
When you're like, you have students in your class that are like, I don't care about any of this, and then they can see that this theories can be applied to something that they interact with. They can find some sort of like connection to that thing.
So right now, I haven't connected it to anything relevant or useful, but one could take a real life problem and weave into the prediction and the rules about physics that would be useful. So what I did is I tried to have you get involved in predicting, in thinking, multi-sensory. You heard, you saw. I could have had you come up here and move, but I wanted to have the tallest person, but I could give each of you a set of these and you could do it in pairs. So what I'm trying to show you from this is that what happens when we start with a concept without the concept. We experience the concept. And we usually see that students will be engaged. There'll be some level of levity, happiness, fun. Curiosity is probably the most important thing, is you didn't walk in the door wondering if 2 balls fell, would they drop at the same and hit the ground at the same pace. You probably didn't lay awake last night wondering if you stacked balls, would it change the bounce, right? But the issue is you can create curiosity that may not be there until you prompt it by creating something ambiguous or uncertain or controversial. The rule of physics isn't ambiguous. We tested it several times. What we did is we created ambiguity by how we framed and used the rule. So it's not that the content is ambiguous. I've had people say, I teach accounting, there's nothing ambiguous, there's rules, or whatever it is you're teaching. You create the ambiguity around what the learner is thinking. There's usually interaction when we do this. There's learning. Some people will say, well, you didn't learn anything. Well, you learn to question your assumptions. You learn you may not know. And most importantly, you create a need or a desire to know more. That's the whole point. So the issue for Kolb Cycle is there's a lot of concepts built into it, but the very first one that I want to emphasize is that we often don't prepare students for active learning. Very often we start a class and we save the active learning for the very end. We have a group activity. But meanwhile, we've done a lot of conceptualization, abstract ideas, and then we jump into active learning. Kolb has a different approach, and I call it preparing students for active learning by being active. Mary Ellen Weimer, who wrote Learner-Centered Teaching, says, you can lead a horse to water, but what's the rest of that? Can't make him drink. She says, absolutely, but you can salt the oats, which makes them thirsty. She said, so our role, in addition to what we might think is to communicate our expertise, the expertise of others in higher learning, is to engage learners in the process of becoming curious to learn. And she said, rather than blaming the students for their different expectations or even resistance to learning, we need to design in the learning process curiosity. So how do we do that? Well, there are many options for active learning. What are some strategies you use for active learning? What kinds of things do you do? Just name them. What do you do?
Projects.
Projects.
Small group projects.
Group projects, what else?
Problem solving.
Problem solving, what kinds of activities?
I'll provide a photo at the beginning.
Photo.
As a discussion prompt, or a question as a discussion prompt to start.
Questions, videos, discussions?
Start with something that is from contemporary, like a contemporary issue that has been impacted by the historical subject that we're talking
Right.
about.
And sometimes that, because we love our content, we are actually infatuated with our content. We often say, you come over here to this circle of concepts that I love. It's so great, you're gonna love it. Instead of going where they are, which is indifferent sometimes, skeptical, not even sure they wanna be there. So if we start where they are and try to build curiosity, we need to start with the novice learner's ideas. So all these options, simulations, case studies, group work, labs, studios, how do you and when do you use them? Right? There are many, many techniques we could teach you. And Kolb gives us a different way to approach, a different framework. So we could have students collaborating, we could have students alone. We can have them online, we can have them face-to-face, we can have them in groups, we can have them silent, we can have them loud, we can have them moving around the room, right? There's so many choices. So I want to impress upon you that it's not the technique, it's the goal of the learning outcomes and how we move students to demonstrate those outcomes. Kolb is not a technique, it's a whole framework for whatever techniques you use. So it's even underneath the frameworks, or the techniques. So how would this look? Well, Kolb says, we often, as teachers, like to start with the abstract. Well, they have to know the theory, right? So we say they have to have the base knowledge. And he says, and he didn't create these axes, they've been around a long time, concrete versus abstract, active versus reflective. And I won't go into the learning styles piece of it, but there are 4 quadrants. And he said, if we move students through these 4 quadrants, these axes, we will engage all learners. But this place to start is after we've written outcomes for the session, and I do a whole workshop on this, you have to know what you're driving that day. You have to know where the active learning is going. It's not active for the sake of active, it's active learning. So we have to know what we want to get the active learning to result in. Start with something concrete that is riveting, ambiguous, controversial, and I have many examples on your sheet, which somebody, did I move this? I have examples across disciplines. I've done this for years, been collecting examples of how people created a concrete experience within their course content in their field. And then we let the students question it. Now I have back here, I have a video on the ball experience, which I usually show. If you had an online class, you could create a concrete experience online by having students.
Or we'll have the obligatory commercial.
Now I'd like you to make
All right.
a prediction.
So same thing, having a prediction,
In my right hand,
and you could have students do a discussion online about what they predict before they finish the rest of the video. I want to go back to my PowerPoint lane.
4 fingers.
4 finger, okay. And then there's also a video on the bouncing experiment. Physics.
Check out how high these different balls bounce. The basketball, the super bouncy ball, and the golf ball. Now I'm gonna try the golf ball on top of the bouncy ball.
All right, so I'm not gonna give you, oops, went out of it. Oh, that's not where I wanna go. Lane.
4 fingers the other.
Okay, all right. So I just want you to see that this idea of using the framework can be adapted because we have so many options for bringing concrete experience or interactive experiences using media. So we don't have to demonstrate. I have many examples of demonstrations that people do. So we start with the concrete, which is arousing and riveting. I have a couple of videos on the workshop I'll show next week that show a wide range. They aren't all physical. Some are very, very puzzling visuals, right? and have the students just question it and think and try to make sense of it. What we want to do is push students up to the limits of their own prior knowledge, what they bring over here. Remember, we're going over where the students are, and they try to make sense of it. It doesn't matter if they're right or wrong. What the issue is that they're engaging in the making sense. We let that go. We let their theories, we let them theorize, we let them compare, hear multiple voices. It's a great experience to do the first day, because the first day you want to model, this is a class where you need to think. This is a class where there are multiple perspectives. This is a class where we wonder. So you have that experience the first day. So we move, and this could be 2 minutes, this could be 20 minutes, this could be a whole class, the concrete. You're the designer, and we let this go. You don't tell them any answers. And then when we get to the abstract, it could be you, it could be a student, it could be a documentary, it could be a guest speaker. The concepts, the theories, the ideas that you want to get across are now relevant because we've prepared them for learning. We've created a need to know more, a question. So we often start, again, with the ideas, the answers, before they have questions. Without a question, it doesn't really seem relevant. And after this, and I'll say some people, I don't know how I got a V there, but I do. We will break up some people will have a 45-minute lecture. We will break that up into small chunks where we will have students maybe in pairs, grapple with that, make sense of it. We might have them write something as they're making sense of it. We might have a whole discussion. I will tell you, I lean against all class discussions. It's one of the most overused and ineffective strategies. And I'm going to encourage you to take a week or a half a semester and not use discussion. Why? Because when we do discussion, and what we need for learning is every brain needs to change. In discussion, suddenly we've diffused the learning, and what usually happens? 4 or 5 people contribute. I don't know what the learning is going on with everybody else. I don't have a way to see that. So I call it creating an opportunity for disengagement. Doesn't mean it will, but you've raised the likelihood that half the people will not engage or will not do the thinking. They might be passively listening as if you were lecturing. It can be very close to lecturing. So I'm going to encourage you to try bringing it down to pairs or individuals or maybe groups of 3. The more brains I can get working on this, the more interesting it's going to get. So then we get to the 4th quadrant, which is active, where they use these concepts or ideas. It could be individually they solve a problem, they could be in small groups. This is a great time to bring in group work in class in small groups. But it might be they take this very same issue and apply the concept, might be a little more complex where they apply it, or they look at this issue with the lens they now have because they understand it. So you can do several active steps, and you can save one for homework that they do, one that they do online. But by the time they get through this, you have engaged them through the whole process, or more likely. Now you could, if you have a 3-hour class, you could do 3 Kolb cycles in a 3-hour class. You are the designer. You could do these 2 in one class, start the next class here. You could get this far and the next class here. You could get this far and this goes online. You can chop it up how you want. The main thing is you start with the reflective. You let them make sense of it. You aren't teaching them here. You're creating a process. And here's where you or someone engages them in the conceptual understanding because they're now ready and engaged. So again, just to kind of cement this process, and then Bill's going to give you a much more in-depth example of his work. The concept behind this, there's several learning concepts, but we want to evoke the prior knowledge. One of the most important learning concepts that has come in the last few decades is prior knowledge, that the prior knowledge is in there, and you'll say, well, they don't know anything about this. You know what? It's very hard to find something they know nothing about, whether it's an assumption, an opinion, some exposure to media, some other human who has discussed something they've read in the doctor's office, right? So we want to bring out their ideas. This was a little simple today and it had to be quick, but there are more complex examples I'll show in the workshop where students really sort of ruminate some range of ideas that came from their backgrounds, that came from their beliefs, that comes from their community, that comes from their culture, that comes from their learning, even a course they took. We want to get that on the table. Again, we're starting here where the students are. And we need to get that out because the new knowledge will either displace that or it will line up with that. And then these are just questions, very few questions, not a whole battery of questions. What did you see? What is this? What's going on? Why is this happening? Just a few questions. The mistake people make is they bring in a new thing here and then they have the question. No, you're moving too fast. Have the question go back onto that concrete thing that they all experience. And people sometimes have put it where students experience it individually. There's something very palpable or rich when everybody shares this experience. And it could be in a forum online where they talk about it. But if you keep it a siloed experience where they don't hear each other's reactions, you lose some momentum, some energy from that. So they share this, and then what explains this? How do we make sense of this? How do we understand this? What are the principles, frameworks, and concepts? Where do we look? What do we have available, right? So we bring that in, and then how can we apply these? How can we recognize these patterns? How can we use this in real life? So that's Kolb Cycle in a nutshell. We use the features of surprise, riveting, bring in relevance, something that's unfamiliar or something that's familiar that becomes unfamiliar because of how we framed it. Social interaction, multiple views, controversial, open-ended, there's no clear answer, ambiguous, predictable, and it prompts really big questions. And our aim is in order to evoke prior knowledge, misconceptions, curiosity, wonder, maybe even a very big threshold concept that will be explored through the whole semester if you do this on the first day. Engagement, uncertainty, and a need to know more. And I already mentioned this, got ahead of myself, but prior knowledge is so important that we don't lose sight of the fact that when we're teaching, these are whole human beings, but they are also brains. They have brains. And we neglect to a really odd degree that we have to have change happen in their brains. If that doesn't happen, it's very unlikely they're going to be able to retrieve it or recall it. So we have to some level of individual work, accountability, sense making, or it's just very unclear. People ride the wave of who else is learning in the class. So you have this list of concrete ideas from different fields. Some are videos, some are demonstrations, some are physical things they do, and you'll see a bunch of these at the workshop next week. And I've created this little tool that I use when I go into classrooms. It's minimizing opportunities for disengagement. So when I have people plot in a course session, and this is the middle, how engaged are their students on average? I have them plot this. Some of them kind of show a concave curve. Some show that they get more interested as they go into active learning. I'm proposing to you that if you use Kolb Cycle and you start with something ambiguous, riveting, controversial, you have them try to make sense of it. You bring in the content, the concepts that you chunk with some interactive activities where they can make sense of it, and then they use it. You will sustain engagement throughout the whole class session and achieve the course session outcomes. So this is a visual for you to try to remember. Your goal is to engage each individual learner through the class session. So here's, again, a reminder of the cycle of Kolb, and that the workshop will be next Thursday, and we will look at how to design a lesson plan and embed Kolb into the lesson plan. Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, and you'll get this book too. Oh, and I didn't do the thing.
I'm fine, I'll get it. Just gotta get this one to go away. Oh, there's pills.
All right, thank you very much. I'm Bill Cleveland, Dr. Cleveland, although of course my friends will out me to my students and say I'm just Bill, and I do the arrows to move, right? All right, so I've got several learning objectives here specific to build on what Connie said. We are going to practice active learning by doing the following. I don't know if you've ever been to presentations where people just talk at you. No, expect to get up out of your seat because I'm going to actively involve you, because I want you to be, by actively involving you, you will actually learn Kolb Cycle. We're going to implement it. There's a surprise at the end, and we're going to rethink your classroom instruction. The burden is put on the students to learn rather than you just blah, 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 blah. Okay, that's the way I roll. I learned this by teaching people how to swim and training dogs, how to become service dogs. Use metacognition. I'm writing a paper about it right now, so it's very fresh in mind. So, Kolb Cycle, as Connie said, you have a concrete experience. You want to involve your students in new learning. You want to have some reflective observation where you process the experience. Then you're going to generalize the experience by using some abstract conceptualization. And then you're going to use theories to solve problems through active experimentations. Dogs, not so good at this, but that's okay. All right, so we're going to pair up. Everybody across the aisles, Connie, you're with me, Renato in the back there. So what we're going to do, and I will, in the Q&A, we can address how I do this. Never have a group larger than 4. So what you're going to do, you have a minute to decide. Do you see the 4 sticky notes there? This is an actual test done in World War II. The Navy was examining where their bombers needed armor to increase safe returns. They were tired of their bombers getting shot down and damaged. So they wanted to put armor in places where they were suspected that they were causing problems. They analyzed where the bombers were getting damaged. The little red dots is where they returned with damage, and they developed this image. So what single area of less than a meter square would you armor the bombers? You have a pink sheet there. Between the two of you, you decide where you do that. You have a minute. Let's go.
You know, what do you think? What you think?
You already know the answer.
I love it.
Well, I don't know where the fuel is.
There's only one place you can put it?
But
I'll let you both. Don't put one up. You can put one up at the end.
if you didn't have the wings, though, you might still be able to solve it very good.
Sure, yeah.
So do we look at where the most concentration is?
It's mostly equations.
Bill, you can only put it one place?
Yeah, but you can only put one place because you've got a weight
There were
limitation
four,
on
so
the
I
plane.
didn't know if you
No. Each group gets
Gotcha.
one sticky note.
Gotcha. So we have to choose one place.
Tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. That's 30 seconds.
We need at least one engine.
And remember, this is World War II. We have what do they call that?
So,
They don't get hit there.
Where you can't use as much stuff as you want.
Okay, so looking at that,
over one engine.
visually, it looks
So I
to me
need a-
like.
Sure.
All right, Renato is up. Let's go.
Right at where like the,
It's okay.
Okay.
right at where like the tail and the fuselage meet. Higher.
Higher.
Right there.
Right there.
Okay,
Oh, okay.
that's fine.
Where's the sticky notes?
On the side.
The sticky notes, it's pink sticky notes.
Where the.
Oh, yeah.
That's okay. You can take whatever approach you want.
What's under here is the problem.
That's fine.
That's
Just
the
do it.
idea.
It's
All right, Connie, do you want to put
Spirit
one
is
up there?
underneath, is that what you're saying, Mark?
No,
All right.
I mean, I know the answer, I don't want to.
All right,
If you
So-
hit there, they survive. When they don't,
this is brilliant. So,
I'm guessing-
this group here, tell me why you picked this area.
Because no matter what happens, you need at least one engine to fly.
Okay, so you're saying trying to protect the engine, because this looks like you're behind the engine. Okay, how about the tail?
It was under the wing a little bit too.
Okay,
I see, yeah.
Oh, the integrity of the plane,
So-
so that it still.
If you lose your backside.
if you lose the tail, you lose the plane. Okay, the back.
Since these are bombers that got back, presumably they can sustain some damage there. So pick somewhere in the midline where you can't lose something like a pilot. So because you hit there, you don't make it back.
Sure.
And the fuel.
But I don't know what's under that part of these planes, so it's hard.
Right, on the underneath part?
Right.
Yeah, like, if there's a fuel tank on the midline, that might be a problem, but anyway, so that was just a thinking there.
The fuel tanks actually are generally in the wings.
Oh.
I mean,
So-
right about the middle, there might be a bunch.
So I commend you that you all seem to be asking the right question, because when the Navy did this, they were putting armor in all the places where the bullet holes were. And they're not asking the question. And most of the time when I go through this with people, they're putting it here. And I love this one because you're like, you're gonna fly around in a circle, right? Because you're weighted to one side, right? But asking the right question in this situation, I think you've all clued into the whole concept of survivorship bias, which is what this is. I actually do this in class and ask about survivorship bias because right here you've answered the question, what does it mean to return safely? And I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
Mark.
Mark articulated the question very well. You're only looking at the planes that return safely. So the ones that crashed and burned, you don't know. And not only do you lose the aircraft there, you lose the pilot, you lose whatever equipment you have. So that's a lose-lose situation. Where the red dots indicate is where you can safely sustain damage and get back to either the aircraft carrier or your air base. And they actually, this is a process that went through, and the Navy was getting ready to do this, put all this stuff, the armor in all effectively the wrong places, because they're like, oh, well, here's all the damage. This is where we have to protect the plane. Actually, no. So this guy, Abraham Ward, wrote 8 memos. You can find them on the internet. It's 88 pages, fascinating reading, especially if you like mathematical formulas. But actually, you read the prose in it, it's fascinating of the logic that he went through of saying, all right, this is, if we get damage here, we're in bad. And he actually divided the plane into different parts, like the engines. Okay, yeah, we can't go like Ed said, we can't sustain damage to an engine and get back safely. They actually said with the cockpit, machine gun fire can take out the pilot and you crash the plane. And they also had in the back in the fuselage, they said, okay, you lose that, you lose the plane. And so he broke it down in different ways that people could get hit and damaged. And remember that you have 2 populations. You have your undamaged bombers, people that just do their missions, right? And you don't necessarily have to worry about them. And then you have your damaged bombers, and they're actually 5 to 10% of the bombers that crashed. 90 to 95% of the bombers get back, but they have some damage. And so they have 2 populations, but you're really most worried about these 5% that you're losing. And then you figure out, he actually went through the formulas to figure out, all right, what can we sustain damage to and actually get back safely? So this whole presentation is part of a class we're doing cognitive biases. Survivorship bias is one of many biases that we face in life. And so I think I've already addressed this, how the sample here is fundamentally biased. This is survivorship bias, right? And you have to challenge your fundamental question of, are we actually asking the right question? Because the Navy was already just armor where they already have damage and say, all right, well, we're still going to lose 5 to 10% of our bombers. And, after a couple of months of that, you're not going to have that many bombers left, right? And so you've got this problem using this biased data, and this is a problem that we confront when we go through our lives. So, other examples of survivorship bias. You're best in class. You're lottery and casino winners. Woo-hoo-hoo. All right. Why do the people that manage the casinos and manage the lotteries take pictures and publicize the people that win? What?
They think you're going to be one of them. It's like, he looks average, they look average. I'm average, I'm going to win.
Yeah, I could win, even though the chances of you getting in a car wreck today are far higher than you winning the lottery, like by a lot. All right, the chances of you getting coronavirus are actually probably higher than you winning the lottery. Okay, I mean it's pretty skewed, but they want you to say, "Oh, this guy won, so you can throw your money at us." Woo, yeah, we're going to chant that pretty well. Self-made millionaires and billionaires. All right, forget it, kids. Drop out of school, get into software development, and you are going to be a millionaire, billionaire like Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg. I mean, come on, that is the path to success, right? Right? How about superior products? Sony Betamax, the Microsoft Zoom. Does anybody remember those 2 products?
Yes.
I know one.
Okay? Technically superior to their competitors, but they didn't have the whole they didn't have what it needs. So that was the best in class, but they couldn't match the marketing and all that. And anybody that's an Apple fan, just remember that Apple wouldn't exist without the $150 million investment by Bill Gates in 1998 that bailed them out. Because if they didn't bail them out, they would have split up Microsoft just like they split up AT&T. So anyway, just a little digression there. Another example is extrapolating from your current experience, knowing what are saying, oh, well, these students are successful or failing, and then we're going to extrapolate from that might not be it. Epidemiology, survival rates versus condition at diagnosis. Why is pancreatic cancer considered so deadly?
They diagnose it so late.
Yeah, you're at stage 4 by the time they even know you have it. Breast cancer now, it's not a death sentence. It used to be much later diagnosis. Coronavirus, we will see where that goes. So, who's susceptible to cognitive biases? All of us. Oh my gosh. Is there a presidential election coming up? Just think about that. All right. So now audience participation, student engagement opportunity number 2 with your partner. I've got 2 minutes to give analogies for learning about survivorship bias. Okay? I want you to develop an analogy. I'll take these off here to make it easy to read. There's only 3. That makes it easy. So, and you want some sort of analogy, a metaphor, a simile, an idiom. I put definitions up there. And I'm just giving a thought prompt. If you're struggling, how do I do this? How does a crashed bomber or a surviving bomber relate to your students in any way? So, 2 minutes. Then we're going to share. All right, Connie.
We're too close to the microphone. No, it's fine.
I'm trying to figure out what exactly you want this to do. Yeah.
But
Yeah. Right. You know, that
Because they don't know what options they have, they're going to fill all these without school.
Right.
And so what you get here versus here.
It's diagnosed on the product, and I can't generalize. You get some that see the potential, some that parents insist, some that don't want to be here, some that
that bias that kind of
want something better.
Okay.
You know, like, it's
TikTok, I haven't been keeping up with you guys.
I think, I mean, the idea is students,
what is your analogy?
Huh?
What is
Ask
your-
it. I'm trying to.
Only by studying doesn't
Succeeded.
success, but
One by
failure.
the airplane.
Okay.
Yeah, the people that, we can't examine the ones that have left school for retention rates, right?
Yeah.
Because there's no like exit.
Right, yeah.
So, how do we find out, we gotta keep the ones that have, the people that have come back to class but have failed, people that the C's, the D's.
Yeah.
Maybe they're the ones that we have to, that's the analogy, or
But then
those
he's
are the
looking for
damage
life
plans.
force.
Sure.
Similar
We don't care about the A's, so they got.
Yeah.
It's those people that are the C's and the D's that we have to
Using a hammer to
look at, they're the planes with the damage.
Right.
Hammer to fix your
And then we have to,
Yeah.
Some people might.
We got our analogy. We could.
All right, what's your analogy?
If we had the solution, then we could, get a paper written and like, something. But he's already writing it down.
I don't know.
Oh, I think he's gonna use the one that we said. We came up with a bunch of them though.
You got one, Sarah.
Yeah, what's that?
So,
You go ahead.
Shout it out.
I mean, you got a million of them. You better start. So you
No, let's hear yours, and then we can go back in a second.
we were thinking about students, looking at the damaged airplanes are the students that get the C's and the D's.
Right. And the crashes of the house, right?
And the crashes are the people that drop out.
Withdraws, yeah.
Because we don't know about them.
Right,
You
we're
know,
gone.
why they drop out.
Yeah, that's true.
Now, I'm adding a little bit. And you'll please apologize for my absolutely horrendous penmanship.
I can read it though. That's good.
All right, so a couple things here. Only by studying success can you find failure. Do you use a hammer to fix your plumbing? Students that get C's and D's, salvageable and need reinforcement. Did you guys have other analogies you wanted to bring up?
Well, what we're thinking about in part of it is using, in our teaching, the strategies that worked in one place for something else when they're not really appropriate.
Okay, so
So,
one size does not fit all.
correct, yeah.
That's a beautiful one.
And you can even be in domains that aren't that far apart.
Huh.
I was just,
Something in a small class, we don't work in a large class.
Right?
Well, or using a chemistry formula is not going to teach you about interpersonal relationships.
Okay.
Like, it's just this survivorship bias is this mismatch, right? You're using information that doesn't apply to the problem. So that's why we were thinking about the hammer and the plumbing, or you have this tool, but you're fixing the wrong problem.
Okay.
Well,
that's just like a conversation.
they were fixing the right they were trying to fix the right problem, but they're using the wrong data.
Right.
It's
right.
relevant data, it's not like completely unrelated data. It's data that doesn't solve that question.
Well, asking the wrong questions, but that's
Right.
not a metaphor or a simile or an
Yeah,
idiom.
so we
Right.
want a little bit.
There we go. Well, and I was trying to lead Connie down the primrose path of something that I look at in terms of, because I've had students in a master's program that don't excel academically and they get to a master's degree level. And I say that those are students that have survived the academic hazing process. They are not flipping burgers at minimum wage anymore. They're trying to improve themselves through education. So you recognize that somehow trying to take your own students to say, well, they're representative of the entire population. Au contraire, I don't think so. They have actually come through and looked more like us, because I think that we're all successful academically than look like the general population. And that, again, to me, is one of these cognitive biases. And I think that we all had some very good examples of, all right, within group and then without group, to say, all right, there we go. How do you take this knowledge and this information and say, all right, how can I apply this in my classroom and to learning and to teaching, and to make sure that as I'm approaching the teaching situation, saying, okay, you might be a little bit different than everybody else, and I can't necessarily apply, like you guys have inferred, you can't take a tool that that worked in one situation and just mindlessly apply it to another situation and say, didn't work. Well, did you actually, did you use your hammer to see what level the water was? That's okay in your plumbing in the water tank. Say, all right, where's the level? That's okay to use the hammer. But to say, I'm going to drive a nail through this pipe and everything's going to be fine. Not really so much, right?
Well, we also talked about this idea, like, if a student crams for one test and is successful, that does not mean he'll be successful on the next test, right? Like, one approach is not gonna solve, it's not gonna give them the answers for everything.
Right, and it doesn't necessarily create good habits for learning either. And so that to me is incumbent upon us as instructors to say, all right, how do I set up a framework and from what I know about learning to say, all right, how am I going to take what I know? I understand the general concept of learning. How then do I model that behavior and not reinforce bad habits, but reinforce good habits?
I think that what's coming to mind, I'm not sure, I'm struggling with this, but we do things as an institution, and many institutions do this, looking at something we think is successful, and I'll use HIPS as an example, and it's measured and it's looked at, it's really impacted positively. But if it doesn't allow access and other students in an equity way aren't having access to it, we've looked at the sample for whom it was successful, and we may not have looked at the students who didn't even get up to bat in a HIPS to look how it affects them. So I think there's really broad applications of this bias, whether it's success or non-success bias, both are biasing.
Excellent. Excellent. So, just in brief here, let's summarize some things that we've gone through. Involving you in new learning. We did the armor problem solving. We processed the experience by talking about, going through with the bullet points over the airplane, facilitating the discussion on the armory. Did a little interactive lecturette on why do we have these biases, and then we did the analyses, which was your active experimentation. There's a whole bunch of ways you can apply this. I found this resource very helpful. And by the way, if you read Kolb, read the second edition. The first edition is a really good cure for insomnia. Trust me, been there, done that. Okay? So, and all these will be on the thing. So, why do we use Kolb Cycle? This is going to, Blaine, you're putting these on the
all of this will be on my
rock on. All right, so, I want to tie some things together. Connie alluded to this. When you're developing your course activities, you want to make a conscious connection between your course purpose, your learning objectives, and then your activities. Start with the purpose. Why am I teaching this course? Why should students take this course? When they think 3 years from now why I took this course or what I got out of this course, there should be a bullet point or two that they come up with. Then you design your learning objectives around it, and then you do your activities. Don't just get, oh, that seemed like a cool activity. How can I work that into my class? No, start with why I'm doing this, and top down say, this is what we're going to do. Not a bottom up approach of, ooh, I've got all these disparate, different activities I want to do, and I'm going to tie that into a course. I think that's a lot less effective. You want to make sure it adds up to a so what situation. So many times I'm having students, why are you asking me to do this? Okay, I get that. People are busy. They're holding full-time jobs and getting a degree. They don't have time to waste doing things that don't make sense and aren't going to do it. Better learning results. I mentioned this. Lectures are boring. Blah, 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 blah. Tune out. Go online if you want to do that. Just have a minimally interactive thing. I think the strength of the bricks and mortar university is the chance to actually talk to each other and get to know each other. I force the interaction with students. And I found that this is less instructor work during the semester, a little bit more work getting it all set up because you really have to think about it, but once you get the thing set up, then it just starts to come very naturally. And you put work learning as learning is going on where it should be. I don't need to learn this material anymore. I know this material. The students don't. And every year of students comes in knowing the same little that the last group came in, and I actually keep learning more. So I keep getting farther away from where they are as novice learners every year. Now, Connie alluded to this, and I just want to elaborate this. In our lecture, I'm sure you've all seen this at some point. You got their attention here in the first couple minutes, and then if you turn this on the side, this would all be Z's, because this gets boring listening to somebody talk for a long period of time. That's why you have to keep bringing that attention back up by involving people. Boom, 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 boom. I'm actively involved. If you don't do that, you lose people. So, how can I use this in my classroom? Love to get some thoughts. How you can use experiential learning in your classroom. I have some ideas of things that I've had here. And in fact, if you've been a regular attendee, you'll see that each one of these are things that we've talked about in the active teaching lab just this semester. Thoughts? Questions?
I really appreciate you, both of you talking about this, and hearing the theoretical and then getting more of like how you do it in the classroom, because that's one of the things I've always struggled with Kolb is how do I do where's the like often I see these questions, like where does the content come in? I need to be able to give them content because that's one of the biggest complaints that I hear from students is active learning is just the instructor not wanting to work ahead of time or not wanting to work. I have to do it all myself, but you want them to get that engagement, you want them to do the activity, but at the same time, there has to be, you want some content transfer somewhere along the line and kind of showing how that works and fits in with this cycle really was helpful to me. So I appreciate both of yours presentations.
Thoughts?
Can I borrow your slides with the airplane? Because I want to use that for group decision making because I talked about group process and needing a devil's advocate. And you're about to form groups and I would love to start my class with that.
Don't worry, I will be happy to give that to you.
You'll share with me?
Absolutely, because just don't use it for my students because I need the surprise element.
I think they're different students. And I did have a question for Connie though. So one of the things that you said was large group discussion is largely passive. And so I was just kind of curious because we just had the fishbowl on high impact practices. Do you think that was more compelling or less compelling? Is there a way because what happens when you have small groups all over the classroom is that you need to bring that information together, which then results in a large discussion, right? So is there a way, I don't know, is a fishbowl or is there another strategy? And certainly it's finding the right tool for the different learning outcomes.
So, and I did a workshop early this semester on class discussion, and I'm not against it. I propose it as a sequence of activities. So the fishbowl is a little different than discussion because it's dynamic, people can move in and out, and it's framed by questions. So that can raise, and then there was an activity where people wrote on an index card. And that's kind of what I mean by discussion is I always want to have an opportunity for individuals to interact, to bring it down to their thoughts in some concrete way where they demonstrate their thinking or integrate or synthesize and make sense of it. So fishbowl had a purpose, it didn't have a learning outcome. It had a purpose to raise a conversation. When I'm in a learning context with discussion, if I did it, I may have, and I have a diagram of this, first I might have a video and each individual writes a thought or reaction or shares it with a pair. And then we might watch another segment of it. Then we might as a whole class discuss. Then we might go into groups. So what I'm doing is moving the thinking when it's effective. My purpose might be to get a wide range of perspectives. So I might use a class discussion, but you have to be very careful because if it moves down to just 3 or 4, now sometimes you get an arousal level where everybody's in a very controversial way hinging on each other's thoughts. If you can do that, that's great, but I guess what I'm pointing out is very often it's not that. It's a very vague question, or 4 people knew the answer, 4 people prepared, and and I've been in so many classes in the past year, I've been in more than any other year, and 50% of the people in these classes are not, they're on their computers, they aren't even hiding their phones, they're like this, with their phones. And so that to me this is an opportunity I made for disengagement. Can I do something better? So if I'm going to use a discussion where I want to gel it together, I'm synthesizing, I want it to integrate, right? So I might have people first write, and then I'm going to walk around and watch, and I'm going to stack the deck. I'm going to say, would you share that? When we get into the group, would you share that? So I'm stacking the different perspectives. Or I might say, so how many thought this? Or I might use a clicker or a polling to extract out the range of perspectives so we really are talking about different points of view. So if discussions used has to be very actively rethinking, reconsidering, questioning, comparing, right? Which is very different than throwing a question out and then 4 people answer. I'm saying don't do that.
Did you have anything to add?
I just want to let you know, there will be a quiz on the active learning site, the active teaching lab on these resources. Actually, these are all resources in multiple different disciplines of how to use Kolb in the classroom. So I recommend, pull up the slides. I just did a dozen or so of ones that I found.
And I'll put those on the lab notes as
Yeah,
well. And so that way to make sure that you can use it.
And I just want to point out that we actually, in my presentation, went through Kolb Cycle twice. Not only did we do the airplane, but that was embedded in a larger discussion of Kolb Cycle. So I just want to point that out, that not only did I do that, but we did the example. Then I did this same table. That was a reflective observation. Then I did the lecturette on why Kolb's, and then how I can use this in my classroom for the active experimentation. So you didn't realize, but you went through Kolb's twice, about 30 minutes.
Wheels within wheels. It's like.
And so this is just, you can use it, and you don't, it's not necessarily a linear process, it's very much a spiral process, and you don't have to necessarily do them one after the other, but engaging people in different ways is a really effective way. I actually got into this whole thing because I've been using this training dogs and teaching people how to swim without realizing it had a name. So, I'm like, wait, I've been doing that for decades. And I'm like, oh, it's got a name.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Bill and Connie. I really appreciate both of the